Operation Valkyrie, the plot by German resistance to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazis, unfolded on July 20th, 1944, at the Wolfschanze in East Prussia. Led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, they detonated a bomb in a meeting with the Führer, while their fellow conspirators took power in Berlin. But it collapsed as Hitler survived, allowing the SS to retain control, as over 5,000 plotters, including Stauffenberg, Ludwig Beck, and Friedrich Ulbricht, were executed. The failure cemented Nazi control, leading Germany to defeat as the Soviets raped and pillaged their way through Europe. Post-war, Germany was divided into the capitalist West and the communist East, as up to 15 million Germans were forced from their homes by the Bolsheviks. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel to help me reach 70,000 subs by the end of July. If you'd like to go a step further, you can also support me on Patreon, where you'll get ad-free viewing, all the maps from the videos, and other exclusive content. Thanks so much. Now, back into the video. Years of plotting by the German resistance, a band of Wehrmacht officers, conservative patriots, and civilians culminated in this moment. By mid-1944, the war was a disaster. Soviet Operation Bagration, unleashed on June 22nd, obliterated the Germans, closing in on the Vistula, while Operation Overlord carved a foothold in Normandy. For Stauffenberg, Ulbricht, and General Henning von Tresckow, once the Führer was gone, the Wehrmacht would save Germany from Russia and open talks with the West. On July 20th, 1944, the military met to discuss the war with Russia, but fearing the increased Allied air presence and with Hitler's paranoid ramping up, they refused to hold the meeting outside the secure bunker, ignoring the hot weather. Colonel Stauffenberg inconspicuously left his briefcase next to the Führer, charged with 2 bombs, before leaving the Wolfschanze. At 12:42 p.m., they exploded. Within the bunker, and with no windows for the pressure to escape, Hitler perished instantly, alongside General Rudolf Schmutt and Colonel Heinz Brandt. Stauffenberg watched the inferno from afar, confirming Hitler's demise before racing to the Rastenburg airfield with Lieutenant Werner von Haiften, his loyal aide. From Berlin's Bendler block, the plot's nerve center, Beck, Ulbricht, and Stauffenberg issued orders to reserve army units, proclaiming a Nazi clique had assassinated Hitler and attempted to grab power. Troops seized the government buildings, radio stations, and communication hubs, while rounding up Nazi and SS leaders. In Berlin, General Paul von Hesse, the city commandant, unleashed the Wachbataillon Großdeutschland under Major Otto von Erster-Reimer to lock down the Wilhelmstrasse, the Nazi government's core. Reimer followed orders, storming Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels' office at 4 p.m. Goebbels, caught flat-footed, tried to rally support via radio, but the conspirators severed his communications. By 6 p.m., General Karl Heinrich von Stupnagel's forces disarmed the SD and SS in Paris. Stupnagel urged Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, Commander-in-Chief in the West, to negotiate with the Allies. Across Germany, Valkyrie's orders spread like wildfire. In Vienna and Prague, reserve army units seized Nazi offices, arresting Gauleiters and SS commanders. General Erich Feldgeibel, controlling Wolfschanze communications, crippled SS channels, blocking Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler's counter-orders and giving the coup precious time to seize power. The SS faced a brutal reckoning. Himmler, stranded in East Prussia, was hunted down. General Eduard Wagner captured him near Königsberg by 8 p.m. In Berlin, SS Obergruppenführer Wilf Heinrich Graf von Hildorf, a secret resistance ally, and the Orpo police chief, turned on his SS comrades, ordering their arrest. By midnight, a provisional government emerged, with Beck as Reichsverwieser and Karl Friedrich Gürdeler as Chancellor, while General Erwin von Witzleben took control of the Wehrmacht. The military was now in charge. A radio broadcast soon announced Hitler's death, promising to dismantle concentration camps and Jewish persecution, root out corruption, restore economic freedom, and punish German war criminals, all of which were part of Beck's historical plans. Desperate to prove Germany's intentions, they reached out to the Western Allies. On July 28th, Hassel sent envoys to London and Washington offering a ceasefire in the West and the surrender of German forces in France and Belgium. The closure of concentration camps, which were entirely blamed on a series of now dead Nazis, was broadcasted, with neutral observers from Switzerland invited to verify the action. On August 2nd, Beck's radio address invoked the Atlantic Charter's ideals, aligning Germany's new path with global hopes for freedom. Yet, the Allies refused the German overtures, reaffirming the Casablanca Conference's call for unconditional surrender. On August 1st, Winston Churchill, speaking in the House of Commons, acknowledged the coup but demanded total capitulation, citing the need to crush German militarism forever. Franklin D. Roosevelt, although wary of Stalin's hunger for Eastern Europe, ordering Ambassador Averil Harriman to reject negotiations without surrender. However, Churchill suggested they cut off Lend-Lease to slow the Soviet advance, hoping this could allow them to liberate Poland. FDR agreed, so the Russians were weaned off American financial assistance. Officially, the states needed to use these fundings for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Japan, so they could no longer afford to finance the Russian bear. Ultimately, though, the Allies distrusted the Germans and wished to preserve the Soviet alliance, so crushed the Provisional government's hopes. On the battlefield, the new leadership proved its mettle. With Hitler's cronies gone, generals like Witzleben and Erich Hoppner took charge, sidelining Nazi loyalists who had botched the war in the first place. On August 10th, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, killed from a Normandy strafing attack, assumed command on the Eastern Front. His North African genius now faced the chaos of Operation Valkyrie, where Army Group Center had lost tons of men. Free of Hitler's Runes Feste Platze orders, which had doomed divisions at Vitebsk and Mogilev, Rommel rallied the 3rd Panzer, 4th, and 9th Armies, bolstered by 200,000 reserve army troops under Hoppner. Adopting a mobile defense, Rommel protected key railways and unleashed the 20th Panzer Division under General Major Hermann von Oppen-Bronowitsky to blunt the Soviet spearheads. Rommel's command turned the tide of Bagration, holding the line in the east as the Germans inflicted 1.3 million Russian casualties. The Soviets' ultimate failure in Bagration shook the Red Army. Expecting to steamroll a broken Wehrmacht, they failed to take the Baltics, Poland, or Romania. Stalin, enraged, sacked Chernikovsky for General Georgy Zakharov, allowing Germany to fortify its eastern borders. Meanwhile, in Budapest, Hungary's leader, Miklos Horthy, emboldened by Germany's new leadership and the Red Army's setbacks, signed an alliance with the Allies, flipping from the Axis, which the Germans tacitly accepted. Emboldened, the Provisional government tried again for a Western alliance against the Soviets. On August 28th, Hassel's delegation met British and American envoys in Switzerland, offering to cede Western territories and focus on the East, only asking for the imperial borders there. The Allies, however, rejected the alliance again, demanding a total surrender. With the Red Army's shadow looming over Germany and the Allies refusing to make peace, Reichswehr Beck and Chancellor Goerdeler made a gut-wrenching choice: pour every ounce of strength into halting the Soviets, while essentially letting Americans and British sweep through the West. This gamble would hopefully anchor Germany to a Western future, reflecting a grim calculation that falling to the Allies was a lesser evil than Soviet domination. In the West, Field Marshal Kluge, leading Army Group B, received orders to pull back from France and Belgium with barely a fight. By mid-September, German forces had forsaken Paris, allowing Generals Charles de Gaulle's Free French to march into the city on September 10th. Kluge, working with General Stubnagel, orchestrated a disciplined retreat across the Rhine, leaving only skeleton garrisons to give some semblance of a fight against the Allies. The Provisional government shifted divisions like the 5th Panzer and scraps of the 9th Army to the east. By late September, over 300,000 troops, backed by 1,200 tanks and assault guns, went east, where Rommel desperately wove a defense. With General Hoppner's reserve armies at his side, he held strong points, stonewalling the Red Army push into central Poland. The Soviet First Belarusian Front, led by General Konstantin Rokossovsky, faltered, unable to repeat the lightning encirclement of the Minsk and Brubrysk offensives. Rommel's 20th Panzer Divisions under Oppen-Bronowitsky sliced through Soviet supply lines, forcing Rokossovsky to stall 50 miles east of Warsaw. The Red Army lost hundreds of thousands more and 5,000 tanks by November. Stalin, seething, shifted his forces to the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive, but Soviet gains fizzled in eastern Poland, far from the Vistula bridgeheads. As the Allies stormed the Rhine in November 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower's forces met little resistance, seizing Cologne on November 20th and Frankfurt by December 5th. On the Eastern Front, Rommel's line held firm, thwarting Rokossovsky's advance. Oster's intelligent, built on Canaris' networks, fed Rommel precise Soviet movements, letting him outmaneuver the Red Army thrust. The Wehrmacht, freed from the madness of the SS, fought with professional and tenacious grit, desperate to save Germany from Russia. The Yalta Conference was held in February 1945 at Crimea's Levadia Palace, but the Soviets languished hundreds of miles away from Berlin in central Poland and the Carpathians, while the Allies were surging through the Rhineland. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin grappled with the new reality that the West were the ones winning the war, not the Bolsheviks, so the cards were in America and Britain's favor. Churchill, long wary of Stalin's machinations and designs for Eastern Europe, held a secret meeting at Malta before Yalta to coordinate the Anglo-American strategy. There, the two great leaders of the free world elected to rapidly push their men as far east as they could to try and cut a square deal for Poland. they were constantly hearing from the leaders of Europe's smaller states, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, etc., who all begged them to push so they didn't fall under the tyranny of Stalin. Here, with the war progressing favorably, they saw no reason against it. When they finally met with Stalin at Yalta, he was taken aback by the harder stance from the Brits and Americans, having expected his numerous communist agents in both governments to have brought them to more conciliatory stances. He was powerless to prevent the pro-Western outcome, as Germany was agreed to enter into the Western sphere. After fierce arguments over Poland and Yugoslavia, which caused Stalin to threaten to provide no men for Operation Overlord, it was eventually agreed that Britain and Russia would have occupation zones in Yugoslavia, while America and Russia would have occupation zones in Poland. The Wehrmacht's gamble to give up in the West while holding the East had paid off. On February 7, 1945, General George S. Patton's Third Army seized Leipzig as British forces under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery closed in on Hanover. By February 10th, General Courtney Hodge's First Army reached Berlin's outskirts, facing only token resistance from Wehrmacht units ordered to stand down. On February 12th, the day after Yalta ended, American troops stormed the city, raising the stars and stripes over the Reichstag and securing the Chancellery, where Nazi symbols were defaced. General Omar Bradley's forces locked down key sites, cementing a Western victory as domestic media in America and Britain began gearing up anti-Soviet propaganda as it appeared likely that the war could drag out longer, so started priming the people for such an occasion. The war in Europe ended on February 15, 1945, when Beck and Goerdeler signed an armistice with Eisenhower in Berlin, so word was quickly sent over to Moscow to end the bloodshed. World War II, at least in Europe, was over. The Wehrmacht stood down across the west as the Allies quickly shuffled as far east into Poland to take up their occupation zones. On April 12, 1945, FDR died, so Truman, more anti-communist than his predecessor, succeeded Roosevelt as president. With the European theater drawing to a close, the US, UK, and USSR met at the Potsdam Agreement to redraw Europe. After a few weeks of spirited debates, Europe was redrawn along pro-West and pro-Soviet lines. Germany was firmly in the Western camp, and as the West sensed the growing hostility from the Russians, decided to preserve Germany completely so their pre-war borders remained. Poland was shrunk and divided in two, as the Soviet Union stole much of the Kresy region for Belarus and Ukraine, though without total control of Poland, the Russians feared their Polish puppet would break out into rebellion if they lost too much, so capped more than they historically did along the Styr-Saret river line. Thus, Poland became a capitalist West, with the capital moved to Krakow as the Vistula was the dividing line, and a communist East Poland. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, were outright annexed into the USSR. Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Hungary were all free from Russia, under American assistance. Romania and Bulgaria went communist, but the Balkans caused a headache and nearly led to the war continuing on between the British and Russians. The tensions quickly simmered as Western-backed Slovenia and Croatia became independent from the communist Yugoslavia. Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania joined the Soviet sphere. With the war over, Goerdeler and his government remained in place, though they reworked much of the constitution to fit their Western allegiance and technically became a new German government. They were then recognized by the world as a legitimate German state. Confiscated Nazi assets were redistributed to fund infrastructure projects, while price controls stabilized the post-war economy. Fabian von Schlebendorf's Ministry of Justice oversaw trials of Nazi war criminals, with figures like Hermann Göring and Ernst von Kaltbrunner convicted by 1946 in proceedings similar to the historical Nuremberg trials. These trials, conducted under international oversight with French, British, American, and Russian judges, reinforced Germany's commitment to justice and reconciliation, earning goodwill from Western allies. However, they made secretive deals with the UK and US so that nobody involved with Operation Valkyrie or major leaders of the Wehrmacht were tried for their involvement in the plethora of the Reich's war crimes. Going even further, the clean Wehrmacht myth was heavily pushed domestically, painting the army as a true, righteous Germans, fighting against both the Soviets and the nutjobs in the SS, which was internationally accepted in the West as it fit the narrative to explain why the current German regime was in power. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, funneled billions of dollars into Germany's industrial heartland, particularly the Ruhr, revitalizing steel and coal production, as many in Washington, London, and Berlin suspected a new war with Russia was only a matter of time. Berlin, under American administration, became a symbol of Western resilience, hosting the headquarters of a nascent European defensive alliance that evolved into NATO by 1949. The city's infrastructure, heavily damaged during the war, was rapidly rebuilt with American aid, transforming it into a hub of economic and political activity. With the Soviet threat still looming large, the Wehrmacht was not disbanded, as key officers like Rommel and Kluge became celebrated war heroes to inspire the German people with the sense that the war was not a complete, futile mistake. Earlier Nazi propaganda that painted the Eastern Front as a conflict between the Germanic race and the Asian hordes evolved into an understanding that the war was essentially an effort by the Germans to preserve Western culture from the godless communists. Here and now, the Germans stood tall, ready for their chance to prove their might once more, should the Soviets ever attempt to destroy Europe again. Get this to 5,000 likes if you want a part 2. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon to get ad-free viewing, maps, and more. Thanks for sticking around at the end of the video. I'll see you soon.
Wir kämpfen für Deutschland, für Soldaten, Ehre der Rote, komm nicht mehr zu.